Good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on which time zone you're in, and welcome to Florida Sea Grant's Bite-Size Science. I'm Laura Tew, the Sea Grant agent in Walton County up in the Panhandle, and I will be your host today with Ana Zangronis and Victor Blanco manning the chat box. So please put any questions that you have there. We do have everybody muted, so the questions do need to go in the chat. We're in for a real treat today. We have Dr. Savannah Berry and Armando Ubeda coming to us and talking about a very successful citizen science project that they've had that is pretty much statewide, the Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, thanks so much for that introduction, Laura, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to kick us off with a quick introduction, and then I'm going to pass it over to Armando. So you can go ahead, Armando, to the first slide. So the American horseshoe crab, that's what we're here to talk about. There's a picture there on the slide. I think this is one of the marine critters that most people have either seen or touched through their, visits to the beach or aquariums or things like that. They are not a true crab. They are arthropods, but they're not actually directly related to things like blue crabs and stone crabs that you might think about. They are found all the way from the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, all the way up to the Gulf of Maine. They nest on the beach, which we're going to get into. That's why they're actually very suitable for a citizen science program like this, because they come right up to us out of the water. So it makes it easier for us to study them. Many of you may know that they have a very ancient body form, and they've actually been around for a long time, more than 250 million years for the genus Limulus, which that scientific name you can see there is on the slide. And if you're interested in more about horseshoe crab biology, we do actually have a bite-sized science on horseshoe crab biology and ecology that's in the archives you can check out. So we're not going to focus too much on the animal themselves today. We're really going to talk more about the citizen science program, Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch, and the types of data that we collect. Horseshoe crabs have a really high value for lots of different things, biomedical testing, so any vaccine, implant, anything like that that gets used for us humans gets tested with an extract from horseshoe crab blood to make sure that it's safe, because it's very sensitive to endotoxins that are harmful for humans. They're also really valuable for migrating birds, and they're an important component of the marine food web, especially their eggs. And they do have several other importance in other industries, like they're actually used as bait in other fisheries, and the juveniles are sold, especially in Florida, in the aquarium trade. Next slide. So while these organisms are extremely valuable and have lots of interactions with our coastlines and marine industries, horseshoe crabs have historically in Florida not been well studied. There are federal requirements on the state to set take limits for horseshoe crabs to make sure that populations remain healthy. But over the years, because of limited budgets and other fisheries that also need to be managed at FWC, there wasn't a dedicated data collection effort on horseshoe crabs. And so a lot of times the data wasn't quite sufficient to make the decisions that managers need to make. So they needed better data. Next slide. And that's where the volunteer scientists come in. There's a long history of volunteers contributing to horseshoe crab science in Florida. Going back to 2002, there has been a web system where you can report horseshoe crab nesting sightings. That used to be a website. Now it's actually an app called the FWC Reporter. But more recently, in 2015, I was lucky enough to be able to work with FWC, our state management agency, to design a program to help collect the data that they need in their decision-making on horseshoe crabs. And we launched that program in 2015 out of Cedar Key at the Nature Coast Biological Station, which is where I am based. And now it has become a statewide program, and great local coordinators like Armando and also Ana and Victor now run programs in their own areas, and we're able to collect data statewide. So Armando is going to tell you a little bit more about how that process actually works.
Thank you, Savannah. Yes, I will. Just a second, I'm switching slides here. Second. So this has Savannah said, this program started, quite a while ago and expanded. So basically in this map that you see here in this slide, all the counties which are in blue are all those counties that actually have now a current coordinator. So they have somebody, an coordinator actively working with volunteers, monitoring horseshoe crab. The other counties that you see in green in the map are those the ones that are in the making to becoming established under the program. So these are sites that have been established, that they're monitored frequently, and they're going to be some soon. So they're going to have a coordinator in those counties doing that work. So if you live nearby a county that doesn't have a blue color, you can, see that it's coming to you. Or I'll talk more about possibilities for those that actually live in a county that in this case will be white along the coastline that don't have any coordinator. So with that, so as I said, there's different sites. All sites are different depending on the region where you are. So I'm in Sarasota County. In our case, we have a lot of shoreline, but a lot of the shoreline is already built in terms of great infrastructure like seawalls and rip wraps. So we have limited sites that we can go monitor horseshoe crabs, but we do have some. So you have areas like in Cedar Key, I think they have more coastline and the amount of crabs are way more abundant than we have here, but it's still, all the sites are extremely important and they all vary. So if you're a volunteer, you're able to volunteer multiple sites, which is very cool as well, because you can see the difference between sites in our state. And that's just an example of one of our sites here is, it's pretty active, but it's very small. You cannot see the whole picture, but it's a very small beach where we did the monitoring. And these are some of the volunteers that we have with some FWC colleagues working on horseshoe crabs. So what do you need to become a volunteer? So it's basically 3 basic steps. You have to take a course because this is obviously you have to get the training, get some skills that help you to monitor and survey for horseshoe crabs. Then you will be in contact with your local coordinator, which actually this happens automatically depending of how you get your training, which I'm going to explain in a second. And then basically you're ready to go surveying and monitoring for horseshoe crabs. So let's review the first step. How do you get trained? And I think my colleague Laura, she already put the link, or at least one of the links on where you can get that training. But this is the first way that you can get trained. Savannah and others developed this volunteer training, virtual training, I should say, which is free to take for anybody. And this is basically 1.5, I think it's a 1 to 2 hours training course, depending. You can review, stop and retake. But this will provide some basic biology about the animals you're working with, management, so all the different regulations and why we manage and all these things, the kind of the background information that you will need as well, and the essential skills to actually survey the sites, which I'll explain in a second, and also to manipulate these animals in terms of measuring them, weighing them, tagging them, etc. So you have to learn all these things, all these different skills, which are very technical, but people that are interested is very easy to learn, and it's very enjoyable as well for what we hear from our volunteers. So that's one way you can train, virtual training. You can take that course, and then you already are part of the volunteer corps, I should say. And the coordinator nearby where you are closest will get in touch with you, and then they coordinate, location and dates and stuff like that. If you take the virtual training, you will also be paired most likely with somebody who's already done it. So you basically shadow a volunteer, either the coordinator with a volunteer or a volunteer that's already done this before. So you wouldn't be going into the field by yourself the first time if you only do the volunteer training. And that's what we encourage, to either do both, or also, if you have a site that have a workshop by in-person training, please do so. Most coordinators in all these counties that you saw in blue and the previous slide have a coordinator that have 1 or 2 workshops through the year, when you guys can, in this case, the potential volunteers, future volunteers, can come and have the same training that they did online, but in this time you do it in person. So you learn, as I said, the biology, management, regulation, things like that, but also the essential skills to be able to work with these animals. So what our volunteers are capable after the training, after working, they're able to, not just like you see in the picture, which is surveying a site, which in this case a beach, a shoreline, also getting the animals, some samples, subsamples, whatever you decided to tag, measure, and then release, which is very technical. But also you will learn how to speak about horseshoe crabs to the public. There's a lot of public engagement. You don't have to, but it's a way to educate. So since our mission here at Extension is to educate and outreach, we're provide a lot of information to our volunteers for them to feel comfortable and have all the knowledge that you need to talk to somebody, you know, because you will get asked questions. You will get somebody will stop by and start looking what you're doing and asking those things, which is very cool because then, you know, we spread the word about this program and horseshoe crabs and the importance of them. So that's a big component for us as well. So what would you expect if you become a volunteer? As I said, either you do the training, virtual training, or you do the in-person training. You have all the knowledge then to go in the field and start surveying. So the first step will be to go to the site, which is a site that has already been established under this statewide program. So it's not just the site. The coordinator will tell exactly where you have to be, or you will visit the site with your coordinator or another volunteer. You will walk the site. Depending on the site, you know, it can be a very short walk, or it can be, you know, moderate, kind of not too long, but a little longer, depending on where you are located. You will look for horseshoe crabs, and then you will capture some horseshoe crabs, bring them with you, measure them, take all the biology data that we need, and then release them into the wild with the tag in place. So how can you get this information or this training, where to go? I think they already put in the chat, but if not, this slide will show them again too. You can do it through UA5 Plus. We have a link over there. You can go to the FWC, which is the Fishery and Wildlife Conservation Commission site. You can get the link as well there. And if you say, well, I would like to learn more about this, I'm not sure what implies and all, then you can go into this frequent questions link that you have here, and it will probably have answers to all the questions. But as you said, this is not like a year-round thing. This is a seasonal volunteer program. So there's specific times of the year that horseshoe crabs are more active, and that's when we will expect you to be more engaged. However, we like, and I think Savannah might provide more information about this, but we like people to be engaged through the whole year, because we get information about horseshoe crabs activities in areas that we didn't know that were happening at a certain time of the year. So any information through the year is important, but most of the log work will be targeted to specific dates and specific months. And with that, I'll pass it back to Savannah. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So the next couple slides are to give you all an idea of how this data gets used and what the program is producing. As I said, we launched this program in 2015, so it's been going for quite some time now, even though some sites are only just coming on board in the last couple of years. So there's new sites being added all the time. But so far, just from the public report data, we know that horseshoe crabs, maybe not in high numbers, but at least at some times in some years, nest in every single coastal county in Florida, which means no matter where you live in the state or where you visit the coast in the state, you have the potential to run across a horseshoe crab. We did focus the Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch sites around the state. When a new county comes on board and wants to start, they are focused on the areas of the highest abundance of horseshoe crabs, just because that helps us get better data. But just be aware that there are horseshoe crabs all over Florida. We're really excited that actually the data that our volunteers collected up through 2017 was included in the federal stock assessment. So the data that our volunteers collected actually goes into real world management decision making. It helps estimate population sizes, and that helps managers set quotas for how many horseshoe crabs can be removed for all of those economic purposes that I mentioned before. This process still can get better, but it's really encouraging already that we were able to submit some of our data to that process. Florida horseshoe crab stats as of September 2022. So today, we have more than 48 survey sites around the state, more than 1,000 trained volunteers who have actually gone on a survey. We actually have more than that trained volunteers, but this is the number of volunteers who've actually participated in a survey. We've completed almost 3,000 surveys, counted more than 200,000 horseshoe crabs, and of those, we've tagged 10,655 crabs. So the tagging data is really the type of data that helps us estimate population sizes and trends. It's called a mark recapture study, and lots of wildlife tagging programs like bird banding, which you may be familiar with, or like the manatee satellite tags. Those are often really highly regulated because they're studies on vertebrate species, and you have to have really high level permits and high level training in order to participate in tagging wildlife. So the Horseshoe Crab Watch, the fact that citizen volunteers with training are allowed to handle, tag, and release wildlife, it's actually a really unique example of high level participation in science. So Yeah, those tags, that tag data, and also if you see a tag on the beach and report that, that's really the most important kind of data, and that's the data that we're after. And we've received 726 tag reports just through our program. That's not including the public tag reports of horseshoe crabs that our volunteers have tagged. So it's actually more than that. So we're producing a lot of data, but what about the quality of that data? Sometimes people are skeptical of these types of programs, and sometimes that can be a barrier to the data being actually used in decision making. But I am very happy, next slide, to tell you all that we did a side-by-side comparison study of data that was collected by volunteers versus data that was collected by professional scientists like me and some of the FWC biologists that have participated in surveys over the years. And this is in a published paper. You can see the citation down there, but the main take home, if you look at these bars, basically the mean and the range of things like the width and mass of crabs is not significantly different between professionals and volunteers, which means volunteers are collecting great data and just as good as professionals, which makes me sometimes wonder why I spent 8 years in school. But I guess the take home here is that now this means that volunteer collected data can be used with confidence, not only in management decision making, but also in other biological studies and peer-reviewed papers that can give us further insights into the biology of the species. So this is a really cool thing, and it's something that we really like to highlight, that, you know, our training and our volunteers are producing super high quality data that is going to do a lot for horseshoe crabs. Next slide. And so we've alluded to several of these already, but if you're kind of not sure, or if you didn't see a horseshoe crab watch program near you, there are other ways that you can get involved. So I've already mentioned the FWC Reporter app. If you're out on the beach and you just happen to see crabs nesting, you can report that through the FWC Reporter app on your phone. If you happen to see a tagged crab, if you see a crab that has this white disc on it, there's a phone number and a website that you can use to report. Those tags have a 6-digit number on them, and you know, you can report that number on, you can just Google report a tagged horseshoe crab and it'll come right up as the first result on your phone, or you can call a number. And those are, like Armando said, those are tag reports that we ask our volunteers to report that no matter what time of year, not just during formal surveys. So we always want that data. And you can report it both for living and dead horseshoe crabs. And then obviously we've already told you about how you can become a Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch volunteer. More information about virtual training and all that stuff are at the links in the chat, as well as on the slide. And so I think that was our last content slide, and we do have a poll that we ask everyone to take, and I think we also have time for questions.
That was great, Armando and Savannah, and truly a premier example of a successful citizen science project in Florida. And of course, we got to give the Florida Sea Grant a shout out, since most of us work there. I haven't seen any questions yet, but I have one. I mean, I told everybody I'm from Walton County in the Panhandle. And I noticed that there are several Panhandle counties that are white that don't have horseshoe crab programs. Do you have any insight, either one of you, as to why that may be the case?
Well, I know that Rick has been on the case trying to find places where they nest reliably, but I think our main barrier up there is that the populations are not what they used to be. We only really have anecdotal data to show that, but as much as we have interest in the Panhandle, it's just really tough to find consistent nesting areas for horseshoe crabs, which is kind of a sad story. But maybe Rick will find the secret nesting beach and then, you know, yeah.
I'm gonna add to that. I'm gonna, maybe not for the Panhandle, but I was having a hard time finding sites here in Sarasota County, and through my volunteers, they found a site. So somebody who actually knew the area and found a spot that I didn't know of. So there might be a site in the Panhandle that somebody knows, and well, plus, yeah, in some areas they're declining maybe, and that's what we have this program. You know, we want to learn how they're doing over long term. But yeah, maybe you know of a site that we don't know, and that's extremely important for us and extremely valuable. So yeah, if you don't want to become a volunteer, at least report the activity, because that can be a site.
I think that's good advice. Of course, I'm on the Choctawhatchee Bay, and I rarely get reports of them. I do put out articles for people to report if they find a tagged one. But then all of a sudden we had a big population of them show up after a storm, but it was all on Eglin military property. And so it's that can also be the case that a lot of our coastline is in military coastline, and we don't have access to those areas. So just another little hitch in the get along there. But oh, somebody raised their hand, you said? Oh.
I think Joe had a question, but we don't have the ability to unmute anybody, so we need everybody to tap on.
Actually, I do. I see Michelle. We'll allow Michelle to ask a question since we have a little bit of time.
Cool.
I'll ask her to unmute. Michelle Metzler. Did you have a question?
Well, she's trying to connect or speak at the question. I'm just going to say too that if you report the tag, not only you get a diploma saying for thanking you for participating, I guess a certificate instead of a diploma, certificate. Thank you for the participation, but you also get a very nice pin in a horseshoe crab. It's like a horseshoe crab shaped pin. It's fantastic. So that's another incentive to report the tags.
That's very cool. Okay, so I have unmuted Deborah Rothenberger if you'd like to ask a question.
Sure. I'm not positive you can hear me, but actually my chat is disabled. But I did have a question as to what months would you typically expect to see horseshoe crab activity?
You want to take that one, Armando?
Go ahead.
So it really varies around the state. Horseshoe crabs are invertebrates. They're cold-blooded, and they are sensitive to temperature differences in terms of the optimal times for nesting. Like in the Keys and Miami-Dade, I think you guys see a lot of activity maybe in February, March. I know in Brevard County, it's February, March, maybe a little bit in April. In Cedar Key, ours, and in the Gulf, there actually are 2 nesting seasons, whereas on the Atlantic, it seems where most of the nesting is focused in the spring season. So we actually survey twice in the spring and the fall in many of the Gulf areas. And so in our spring season is typically March, April. Up in the Panhandle in Franklin County, it's April, May. And then again, we are in September, October. So we actually, our very first day of our fall season in Cedar Key is tomorrow.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Deborah. Next, we're going to go to Jennifer Thompson. You have been unmuted.
Yes. My was also disabled. I was curious to see if I'm out all the time, not a trained volunteer, but if I see one that is tagged, how's the proper way to hold the horseshoe crab? That way I can read the number and report it.
I can answer that. Well, sometimes it's easy if you have your phone taking a picture of the tag. So if you don't have to hold the animal, that's the easiest way. But sometimes, obviously, you might have to grab the animal. So we really, and Savannah, you can disagree with me or tell me if I'm wrong, but we do train on to have to grab animals for the volunteers, obviously, because they're going to be handling the animals. But one thing, if you need to grab the animal, at least hold it in place. Never grab it by the tail. The tail is very fragile. They need it to, when they get turned upside down, they use it to turn themselves back up. Otherwise, they might, die if they don't have the tail. So never grab it by the tail. If you look at the animal, the caparage will be the shell kind of thing from the more posterior, more toward the head area where it doesn't bend. You don't want to grab that area because you might get pinched. So carefully, you can kind of hold them from the top part and more toward the head, I should say. or just put a hand on top of it and pin it against the floor, but gently. I mean, they're animals, you know, so just be careful with them. But as I said, sometimes you have enough time, just take a picture of the tag and then you can just look it up and zoom in and stuff like that. But
Yeah, Victor's demonstrating. And I think if you go back to the how to get involved slide, there's an example of like holding them by the front. And they do have claws, but they can't pinch very hard. And their tail is not venomous or anything like that. So they're very benign creatures. They're a little spiky, but yeah, they can't really hurt you.
And again, y'all referred to, we do have a previous bite-sized science webinar, which is also 30 minutes from our first series that is in the archives. So hopefully if you have interest in horseshoe crabs and want to know more about the actual biology, you could go there too. Evidently, Anna pointed out that we had the chat box was not on for participants. So we had a little snafu there, but I think it's on now. And Michelle Metzler is letting us know that Palm Beach County will host their crab watch for the first time this weekend. So another one, it seems like this weekend with a full moon, it's going to be a lot of crab watch action out there. So excited. I don't see any more questions. So I want to thank Dr. Berry and Armando for joining us today and sharing about their program. I am putting in the chat the registration for our upcoming October Bite-Sized Science class, which is going to talk about our phytoplankton monitoring network. This particular network is also statewide, but the focus will be on the Treasure Coast. It's going to be October 6th, 11:30 Central Time, 12:30 Eastern Time. So here's your chance to register in advance and come join us for that. Again, we thank you all for your participation and thank the panel today. One last question. How old do you have to be to volunteer?
For UF guidelines, you have to be 18 to volunteer by yourself, but if a parent is going to accompany the volunteer, we think the program is suitable for really all ages, but the training material itself probably is not good for anyone younger than 13, but supervised youth are allowed to participate with a trained parent.
Open to everybody. Yes.
Yeah. Also had a quick note from my friend Joe Schuster, who's on today, one of our state park volunteers that we've worked with. She was wondering if anybody had a picture of their eggs.
We do, but I don't think I have it.
Handy.
Yeah.
Well, if not handy, I'll tell you what, if somebody will email me one, then I'll make sure Joe gets it.
All right, we can do that.
All right. Well, thank you again today. Again, appreciate everybody and have a great weekend. Hope to see you next month. All right.
All right. Good.
Great job, everybody. As
Thank you.
usual.
Yay.
Great.
Yay.
Hey, it
So
says recording. It's a recording now. It's pause.